They said steel was the language of warriors, that only forged blades could carry honor, and that humans were too fragile to understand either. In a classroom built for apex predators, a single human girl stood alone, too small, too quiet, too breakable, while alien eyes burned into her, waiting for her to fail. On the table before her, no glowing steel, no sacridayoy, only a pale, jagged thing pulled from a wrapped cloth. Bone. A ripple of laughter spread through the class. Mockery. Disbelief. Hunger. The instructor's voice echoed like a death sentence. Choose your weapon and be judged. The girl's hands trembled as she lifted the bone, but her eyes didn't. Because what none of them knew was that this wasn't weakness. This was a promise. The classroom orbited a dead moon. That alone should have warned them. Through wide crystal windows, space burned cold and endless, stars scattered like broken glass. Inside, 40 students from a dozen predator species sat in tiered seats of living metal, claws tapping, tails coiled, eyes sharp with hunger. This was the first lecture of the term at the Galvrix Academy, Interstellar Conflict Studies. And in the lowest row, trying not to disappear, sat a human girl. Her name was Mira Hale, 17, Earthborn, smaller than everyone else in the room. Her soft skin had no scales, no food, no armorplats, just fabric, bone, and breath. She could feel them staring. Some did it openly, slitted eyes tracking her every movement. Others pretended not to care, which was worse. To predators, indifference meant she wasn't even worth killing yet. The instructor entered without a sound. Professor Croft, 3 meters tall, built like a tower of black chitin and corded muscle, for arms folded across a chest marked by old battle scars. His mandibles clicked once, and the room fell silent. Welcome, candidates, he rumbled. Today, we begin with a simple truth. War does not care about your species, only about what you can hold when everything else is taken. A dozen weapon racks rose from the floor. Inside them, blades, forged steel, glowing alloys, plasma-edged swords, weapons etched with runes of ancient victories. The air hummed with restrained power. Croth's gaze swept the class, then settled on Mira. Each of you will choose a blade, he said. You will present it, and you will explain why it deserves to represent your survival. A low growl of excitement moved through the room. Students stood one by one. A Varkeen lifted a serrated twin saber, boasting of its kill count. A scale giraffe chose a molten-edge glaive said to melt armor like wax. Applause followed. Approval. Predator pride. Then Croth's eyes returned to Mira. Human, your turn. Every gaze snapped to her. Mira stood. Her legs shook, but she forced them still. She walked past the racks of legendary weapons, past blades that whispered power, past steel that could slice starship hulls. She didn't touch any of them. Instead, she knelt beside her seat and pulled a small bundle from her bag. Cloth wrapped carefully, almost gently. The room went quiet. She unwrapped it. Bone, a long, pale shard, carved into a crude blade. Not polished, not glowing. Its edge was chipped in places darkened by age. It looked fragile, primitive, almost pathetic among the shining weapons of the galaxy. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then laughter erupted. Harsh, barking sounds. Hissing mockery. Tails slammed against the metal floor in amusement. Is that a fossil? Someone sneered. Did humans invent weapons before fire? Another jeered. Even Croth's mandibles twitched, not quite a smile. You mock this trial, he said, voice cold. You insult the forge. Steel is the mark of warriors. Bone is what steel breaks. Mira swallowed. Her hands tightened around the weapon. I'm not mocking it, she said softly. Her voice barely carried, but something in its steadiness cut through the noise. This blade matters to me. Croth stepped closer, looming over her. Explain. Mira lifted her eyes to meet his. They were brown. Ordinary. But there was something behind them. Wait. Memory. Steel is strong, she said. But it's made by fire. By machines. By factories. You can replace it. You can make more. She raised the bone slightly. This was alive. The laughter faded. It came from a creature that fought to protect its own. It didn't have claws or plasma, just its body, just its will, and it still stood its ground. Her voice wavered for a moment, then steadied. On Earth, we learned that sometimes what saves you isn't what's strongest. It's what reminds you why you refuse to fall. Silence gripped the room. Croft stared at her, unblinking. You think sentiment wins battles? He asked. On the battlefield, bone shatters. Steel endures. Mira nodded. Yes, bone breaks. Then she added, quietly, so do humans. And we keep fighting anyway. A murmur rippled through the class. Not laughter this time. Unease. Croft turned to the others. You see this, he boomed. This is what weakness looks like. A species clinging to relics instead of reality. He faced Mira again. You will keep that toy, he said. And when the trials come, you will learn what it means to stand against forged steel. Mira lowered her head. Yes, Professor. She returned to her seat, heart pounding like it might tear free. Around her, predators whispered, some amused, some hungry, a few curious. But one pair of eyes burned hotter than the rest. Xyrix, top of the class. A towering alien with obsidian scales and eyes like molten gold. Known for breaking rivals in sparring and smiling while he did it. He leaned toward her, voice a low hiss. When the trial begins, little human, he said, I hope they pair you with me. Mira didn't look at him. She stared at the bone in her hands and whispered, so softly only she could hear, me too. The trial began at dawn cycle. A shrill pulse echoed through the academy halls, jolting every student awake. Red glyphs lit the walls, pointing toward the arena, the crucible. Mira walked with the others, bone blades strapped to her back in a simple cloth harness she had sewn herself. Around her, predators carried weapons that glowed, hissed, and hummed with power. Every step she took felt like it echoed too loudly. She could feel their stares again. Not just curiosity now. Expectation. The crucible was carved into the heart of an asteroid. An open pit of jagged stone and floating platforms, suspended above a void of swirling energy. Shields shimmered around the edges, but inside, it was raw, brutal, real. Professor Croft stood at the highest platform. Today, he announced, you learn what your choices mean. You will face one opponent. Last to stand wins. Yield if you wish, but know that in war, no one offers mercy. A thrill of excitement rippled through the class. Names flashed in the air. Pairs formed. When Mira saw hers, her stomach dropped. Mira hail, Xyrix of the Obsidian Brood. A low roar of approval burst from the crowd. Xyrix stepped forward, towering over her, his forged steel blade igniting with a blue edge that crackled like lightning. He rolled his shoulders, scales grinding. Fate is kind, he said. I'll make this quick. Mira walked to her platform in silence. The stone felt cold under her boots. She reached back and drew her bone blade. It looked even smaller now. Croft's voice boomed. Begin. The platform barriers dropped. Xyrix moved instantly. He was a blur of muscle and steel, crossing the distance in a heartbeat, blade screaming through the air toward her neck. Mira barely had time to think. She dove aside. The steel edge struck stone, carving a glowing scar where her head had been a second before. Heat washed over her face. She rolled, came up, heart hammering. Too fast. He's too fast. Xyrix laughed, the sound echoing. Run, little prey. That's what your kind does best. He lunged again. Mira raised her bone blade. Steel Madbona. The impact rang through her arms like thunder. Pain exploded up to her shoulders, but she held. The bone didn't shatter. It held, barely, against the glowing steel. Xyrix's eyes widened for a split second. Then he kicked her in the chest. Mira flew backward, skidding across the stone until she hit the platform edge. The barrier flared behind her. Her lungs burned as she gasped for air. Still alive, Xyrix taunted, stalking closer. Impressive. For meat. Mira forced herself up. Her hands shook. Her arms ached. One more hit like that, and she knew she wouldn't get up again. She closed her eyes for half a breath, and remembered her father's voice, back on Earth, in a dusty yard under a dying sun. Strength isn't just muscle, Mira. It's knowing where to strike when you're scared. She opened her eyes. Zyrex charged again, blade raised for a finishing strike. This time, she didn't dodge. She stepped forward. At the last moment, she twisted, letting his blade slice past her shoulder, burning fabric and skin. Pain flared, but she was inside his reach now. She drove the bone blade forward, not at his chest, at the joint where his armored scales met softer flesh beneath his arm. The bone sank in. Zyrex roared in shock and pain, staggering back. Dark ichor spilled, hissing as it hit the stone. The arena fell silent. Mira pulled the blade free and stumbled back, breathing hard, blood soaking her sleeve. She had hurt him. Zyrex stared at the wound, then at her, disbelief turning into fury. You cut me. His blade flared brighter. He attacked like a storm. Blows rained down, forcing Mira back step by step. She blocked some, dodged others. Each impact numbed her arms. Each miss burned the air beside her. She tripped over uneven stone and fell. Zyrex loomed over her, blade raised. This ends now. Time slowed. Mira saw the edge coming down. And in that frozen heartbeat, she saw something else. Zyrex wasn't careful. He was angry. And angry fighters make mistakes. As the blade descended, Mira rolled under him, feeling heat scorch her back, and slashed upward with all the strength she had left. The bone blade carved across his thigh. Zyrex collapsed with a thunderous crash, his weapon skidding across the stone. He roared, trying to rise, but his leg failed him. Blood pooled beneath. Mira pushed herself up, swaying, bone blade pointed at him. For a moment, neither moved. Then Crotha's voice cut through the silence. Yield or fall. Zyrex looked up at her. Rage warred with something new in his eyes. Fear. His jaw clenched. I yield. A shockwave of murmurs burst through the arena. Mira lowered the blade and stepped back, legs trembling so badly she almost fell. Medroneus descended on Cyrix. Croth stared at Mira, as if seeing her for the first time. The human stands, he announced. Cheers didn't come. What filled the crucible was something heavier. Awe and unease. As Mira walked off the platform, clutching her bone blade, she felt every eye on her, not as prey anymore, but as something far more dangerous. Because she had just proven one impossible truth. Forged steel could bleed, and bone could make it happen. The victory didn't bring safety. It brought attention. Mira felt at the moment she stepped back into the academy halls. Conversations died when she passed. Predators who once ignored her now tracked her with narrowed eyes. Some with curiosity, some with something darker. Word spread fast in a place built on hierarchy. The human with the bone blade had beaten Zyrex. In the mess hall, seats shifted away from her. Not out of kindness, out of caution. She ate alone, hands still shaking from the aftershock of the fight. Every bite tasted like dust. That night's cycle, a message pulsed on her wrist pad. Summons, Professor Croth. Private chamber. Her stomach tightened. The chamber was carved deep into the asteroid, walls etched with scenes of ancient wars. Croth stood at its center, massive arms folded behind his back. You surprised me, he said as she entered. No anger. Just a low, thoughtful rumble. I didn't mean to, Mira replied. Croth turned, eyes glowing faintly. You chose bone. You wounded one of my strongest. Tell me why I should not consider that a fluke. Mira swallowed. Because I knew where to strike. Instinct, he pressed. Experience, she said. On Earth, we don't always have better weapons. So we learn our enemies. We learn their weak points. We adapt. Croth studied her in silence, then gestured to her blade. That weapon, where did it come from? Mira hesitated, then answered. From my home. It was carved from the bone of a great herd beast. It died protecting its young during a storm. My father found it after. He said, strength isn't just what kills. It's what endures. Something shifted in Crotha's gaze. You carry death as memory, he said. Not as trophy. Yes, Mira whispered. Croth straightened. The trials are not over. The next phase is not duel. Her heart sank. What is it? Survival. He activated the hollow. An image formed, a shattered training zone known as the Ash Field. Jagged ruins. Shifting terrain. And at its center, moving shapes with glowing eyes. Tomorrow, you will be released into this field, Croth said. In squads. You will hunt and be hunted. Only those who adapt will return. Myra's breath caught. What about weapons? You keep what you chose, he replied. So do they? She nodded, hiding her fear. Go, Croth said. Rest while you can. The ash field was hell. Smoke drifted through broken towers. The ground cracked with heat beneath their boots. Mira was placed into a squad of 4. 2 scale draft, 1 insectoid Click, and her. They didn't hide their reluctance. Stay behind us, human, one draft growled. Don't slow us. Mira didn't argue. They moved through ruins, weapons ready. Distant roars echoed, not from students, but from the beasts released into the field. Engineered predators, designed to test reflex and courage. The first attack came fast. A shadow dropped from above, slamming into the lead draft, claws tearing through armor. Screams filled the air. Plasma fire erupted. The beast fell, but not before wounding another. Blood steamed on hot stone. Panic rippled. More shapes moved in the smoke. We're surrounded. Click clicked. We should retreat. The draft hesitated. Mira stepped forward. There, she said, pointing to a narrow gap between ruins. High ground. Bottleneck. They can't swarm us there. The others stared at her. Then another roar shook the ground. Move, she shouted. They ran. They reached the gap just as 2 more beasts charged. In the narrow space, the predators couldn't flank. The squad formed a line. Blades and fire met claws and teeth. Mira fought at the center. Her bone blade moved with desperate precision. She didn't try to overpower. She waited, watched, struck when flesh showed, when joints flexed, when eyes turned. She was cut, thrown back once, but she kept rising. At one point, Click was dragged screaming toward the smoke. Without thinking, Mira ran after it. She leaped onto the beast's back, drove the bone blade into the base of its skull, and held on as it thrashed. Heat scorched her skin. Pain tore through her arms. But she didn't let go. The beast fell. Click crawled free, staring at her in shock. Human, you saved me. Mira could barely breathe. We're a squad, she said. That's what squads do. Hours felt like days. By the time the extraction signal sounded, the ash field was littered with fallen beasts and wounded students. Mira limped back with her squad, bloodied, burned, exhausted, but alive. When they emerged, the watching students went silent. Cross stepped forward, eyes sweeping over the survivors. His gaze locked on Mira. The human led, he announced. And they lived. This time, the silence broke. Not with laughter, but with something closer to respect. Later, as medics worked on her cuts, Xyrix appeared at the edge of the ward, leaning on a brace, his wounded leg bound. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Xyrix inclined his head, just slightly. You fight like you have nothing to lose, he said. Mira shook her head. I fight like I have something worth keeping. Xyrix studied her, then turned away. Mira looked down at her bone blade, now darkened with blood and ash. She realized something then. This wasn't just a trial anymore. She wasn't just surviving. She was changing the way they saw humans. And that made her more dangerous than any weapon. Because now, they would test her not as prey, but as a threat. The final trial was announced without ceremony. No chairs, no countdown, just one word, echoing through every hall of the academy, judgment. All surviving candidates were summoned to the grand arena, a vast circular coliseum open to the void, shielded by shimmering energy walls. Above, ancient banners of predator clans drifted in artificial wind. This wasn't just a test. This was tradition. Professor Croth stood at the center, flanked by towering figures of the High Council, warlords, generals, conquerors from a dozen systems. Today, Croth declared, you will not fight beasts. You will fight meaning. Each of you will face an opponent chosen not by strength, but by what you represent. A hush fell. Pairs appeared in the air. When Mira saw hers, her breath stopped. Mira Hale, champion of the High Council. Gasps rippled through the stands. The champion stepped forward. He was massive, larger than Xyrix, plated in black gold armor, carrying a forged great blade that pulsed like a star's heart. Scars covered him, each one a story of worlds burned and taken. This was no student. This was a living legend. Crotha's voice was heavy. If the human wins, her species earns recognition as warriorkin. If she falls, humans remain classified as non-combatants. Weak, protected, or prey. Mira felt the weight of it crash down on her. Not just her life. Humanity's place among the stars. The champion looked down at her, eyes cold. "You are brave to stand here, little bone bearer," he said. "But bravery does not change fate." Mira swallowed, gripping her blade. "Maybe not," she said, "but it can challenge it." The arena barriers rose. "Begin," Croth commanded. The champion moved like an avalanche. Each step cracked stone. His blade swung in a wide arc that forced Mira to dive aside as the shockwave alone tore chunks from the floor. She rolled, came up, and sprinted. She knew she couldn't block that. She darted between broken pillars as the champion pursued, each strike demolishing stone that had stood for centuries. The arena shook. "Run all you want," he called. "You cannot hide from steel." Mira's lungs burned. Her wounds from the ash field screamed. One wrong step and she would be crushed. She skidded to a stop near the arena's edge. No more room. The champion advanced, blade glowing brighter. "Your kind survives because others protect you," he said. "Today you learn why." He raised the blade for the final strike. Mira didn't run. She stepped forward. The crowd roared in disbelief. She met the descending blade with her bone. The impact was cataclysmic. Pain exploded through her arms, down her spine. She screamed as she was driven to one knee, stone cracking beneath her. The bone blade bent, threatening to snap. The champion leaned into the strike, muscles straining. "You see," he snarled. "Steel always wins." Mira's vision blurred, but in that moment, she thought of Earth, of storms and dust, of her father carving the blade by hand, of standing small against a vast, uncaring world and refusing to kneel. She looked up at him, blood on her lips. "Then you don't understand, Bone." With a desperate twist, she slid the blade along his greatsword, letting it scrape and burn, guiding the force past her, just enough. The champion overextended, and, for a heartbeat, his chest was open. Mira lunged. She drove the bone blade into the gap beneath his armor, straight into living flesh. The champion froze. A stunned silence fell over the arena. His blade dimmed as he staggered back, one massive hand clutching the wound. He breathed. "Impossible." He dropped to one knee. Mira stood, swaying, barely able to hold her weapon up. Blood dripped from the bone, dark and steaming. Crotha's voice thundered across the arena. "Champion, yield or fall." The massive warrior looked up at her. Not with anger, with respect. Slowly, he lowered his head. "I yield." The barriers dropped. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the arena erupted. Not in mockery, not in fear, in thunderous roars of acknowledgement. Croth stepped forward, his gaze locked on Mira. "The human stands," he declared. "By tradition and by blood, humanity is recognized as warriorkin." The words echoed into the void. Mira's legs finally gave out. She fell to her knees, bone blade slipping from her hand. Medics rushed in, but before they reached her, Croth knelt, lowering himself to her level. "You chose bone," he said quietly, "and with it, you broke steel." Mira looked up at him, exhausted tears in her eyes. "I just didn't want to be afraid anymore." Croth straightened and faced the council. "Remember this day," he boomed. "Remember the human who stood where giants fell. Let no one say again that strength is only forged in fire." Later, as she lay in the med ward, Zyrex stood beside her bed. "You changed everything," he said. Mira managed a weak smile. "I just wanted to survive class." Zyrex let out a low, rough chuckle. Outside, news spread across the stars. Of a small human girl. Of a blade made of bone. Of forged steel that learned to bleed. And on a dead moon, in an academy built for predators, humanity took its first step, not as prey, not as protected, but as warriors,